In a historic change of events, Vice President Kamala Harris is now the presumptive nominee for president of the Democratic Party after President Joe Biden dropped out of the race. He said it's time for new voices, and he's passing the torch. So now it's Harris for president. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for this special series for Harris for president. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric LaVille. We want to thank you for joining us as you always do on this Sunday morning as we broadcast from the Norfolk State University, home of the Spartan Nation, from none other than WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. Today we have a special series. Now, for those of you that are listening to us, you know that we normally do our community impact series where we bring those that are making a difference in the community. Well, we're breaking into that series for the summer to bring you this special series entitled Harris for President. For those of you that have been paying attention to the news, you know that President Joe Biden, he dropped out of the presidential race and said that he would not seek the nomination of his party. Instead, he would endorse his vice president, who is now the presumptive nominee for the party. And now, instead of Biden for president, we have Harris for president. Right now, it's the first African-American black female that is the viable candidate for their party to be president. In this historic turn of events, there's been a lot of energy. There's been a lot of excitement for this particular candidate, and there's been a lot of energy moving forward in this election to defeat Donald Trump. But how historic is this? What does it mean for the party? What does it mean for the country? And what does it mean for African Americans and the Commonwealth of Virginia? Well, to discuss this very important topic, I'm bringing to you none other than my very good friend who we've done a lot of great commentary together, a lot of great radio programs together, and he himself is an expert and just a major force in media himself, and that's none other than Dr. Will LeVees, award-winning journalist and author. Brother Will, how you feel this morning?
Excellent, Dr. Claville. Always a pleasure to be on with you, my brother. Thanks.
Same here. Look, this is history in the making itself, and you and I are fortunate to be a part of this. You were alive during and covered the Obama era, and I've got a feeling that we're there all over again. Will, you and I, we do a podcast together that was ranked one of the top 15 black podcasts in the country. That's LeVees and Claville.
Yeah, we got to get it back, booted back up.
Yeah,
especially with what's going on now. There's a whole lot to talk about.
Well, look, with the reboot, we're gonna definitely do that. But I want to focus now on what's taking place now. You and I, we talk, and we talked about what was going to happen, and I thought it was inevitable. But when it actually did happen, what were your thoughts when President Joe Biden said, listen, I'm throwing my hat out of the race, and I'm dropping out, and I'm endorsing Harris? How did you feel? What were your thoughts?
I was surprised and relieved at the same time, probably like how he was in many ways, because it just got to a point where so much of the conversation was about that. Is he staying in? Is he going to be forced out? Is he well? Is he too old? I mean, so much of the conversation had just become about that and not about this very important election. So I'm glad that he made the decision that he made, and now we're getting back focused on the election.
When you talk about getting back focused on the election, I kind of knew it was time to throw the hat in when he started to get calls to drop out of the race, and you had your major donor saying no more Doe to no more Joe, right? And you're talking about major donors that had $90 million on the sideline, and not just for the presidential campaign, but they said we're going to stop donating to all Democratic campaigns for election and reelection. The question, I think, previously was, did Joe make the right decision? But after his statement in the Oval Office, I think hands down he did.
Yeah, I think even when you consider, let's go back. And you go back in the campaign for, 2020? His campaign, it wasn't like Joe was Mr. Excitement and Mr. Highly regarded. I mean, it was a campaign where they had a lot of candidates who, quite frankly, weren't really energizing on the Democratic side. And it wasn't until Joe Biden went down to the primary in South Carolina that his campaign really got energized, and that was
like with Congressman Clyburn, the kingmaker.
Exactly. And that was, primarily the black vote. So that says a lot about the importance of the black vote, of the black community to the Democratic Party. But there was always a question, even though there's high respect for Joe Biden, the candidate, the congressman, the politician, and his role with being vice president and all that, there was still always a question about whether he was, the best candidate. And in the minds of many, his opponent, Donald Trump, is totally unacceptable as a candidate. And I think that very much still is the case. So I think a lot of that just really caught up with him, plus the fact that, you get older in that position, that role ages you. I mean, You can look at how President Obama looked when he came in at his first campaign and how he looked at the point after 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you can definitely see that it ages you. So I was a proponent of saying that it's not about just whether he is too old, because there are a lot of people who are elders, they're high 80s, even in their 90s, that are sharp and still very much vibrant. But you can see that with him, there was definitely, a change. And so either there needed to be a professional evaluation to say whether or not he was, competent and mentally had the faculties to do the role, or he needed to do what he did, which is to say, look, the party is obviously not unified now with me at the helm. Let me do what needs to be done so that the party could be unified. And I think that's what the decision came down to. I think he still thinks that he could run and win.
Absolutely.
But I think he came to the conclusion that the party was not unified.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to be helpful going forward. So I'm glad and like I said, relieved that he did it.
Well, we all think we can still do it till we get out there, right?
Yeah. I mean, just show that you can do it. See, for me, I think ageism is a real thing. But if someone is showing that they can still do it, then they should have the opportunity and ability to do it. But if you're leaking signs that you're not up to the task as you were before, that you're not able to do it, I think you got to recognize that too. And I think you got to be honest about that. And that goes for whether you're young or old. That's just a fact of the matter. Either you can do it or you can't. And it was getting to the point where he was going to have some kind of proof that he actually could do it. So he made the right move.
Absolutely. Now, I want to take at least a couple of minutes to talk about Joe Biden's legacy because, it's a hard thing to step down. People don't realize the power that you have as president of the United States.
Absolutely.
That is the most powerful position in the world. You are literally the world influencer and the world leader, especially around democracy. Mm-hmm, and with that power is intoxicating, and it's hard to let it go. There are stories about Clinton when he was, after his last term, he was walking around the White House one last time, just touching everything and so forth. Because, again, once you have that power, it is like no other. But Joe Biden's legacy, in part, will be, an about face from the Anita Hill hearings as it relates to black women and black people to Joe Biden being the first he was the vice president for the first black president.
Right.
Also, he brought in the first black and first female president.
Correct.
He also
vice president.
He also nominated the first black female Supreme Court justice.
Right.
And he also stepped down and endorsed what may soon be the first black female president of the United States.
Ain't that something? You think he might have made up for how he threw Anita Hill under the bus?
Well, listen. One thing is clear. Joe Biden's legacy is cemented as it relates to African Americans in the highest seats in government, as president, as vice president. Well, first of all, Supreme Court justice, vice president, and possibly president of the United States. Without Joe Biden, none of that would have happened.
Yeah. I think, no politician is perfect, and just the nature of politics, there are things that you're going to have to do to compromise and get along, and sometimes, even compromise your better judgment. So you're never going to find a candidate who's been totally perfect. But I think certainly in Joe Biden, especially if Kamala Harris does win the presidency, I think his role that he has played in diversifying the leadership of this country is going to be, unparalleled.
Absolutely. So again, thank you, Joe. That's the tour that's taking place right now. Yeah. Now it's Harris for president. So let's talk about this excitement around Harris. We have a we have a presidential nominee that I think most black people can identify with it, given her background, educational background, and what she has done and her presence in the greater community. Case in point, for the first time, you have a graduate of an HBCU, Mother Howard, who is not only vice president of the United States, but now possibly could be the president of the United States. And then not only that, but she also pledged and is a part of, one of the black sororities, aka Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Right, Divine Nine, yeah.
Those two connections in the black community, how significant is that to connect? And now keep in mind, Barack Obama, first black president, he was cool, he was intellectual, he identified as black, but he didn't have those connections.
Yeah, I think Kendrick Lamar's got a song out, is the hook is they not like us. So I think when you look at Kamala, it's like, yeah, she like us. She's like us in many ways. And, that HBCU connection, I always got to give a shout out to, the Lincoln University of Pennsylvania, the first HBCU, because that HBCU produced heads of state, Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe. And then when you look at who had previously had the highest, most significant office in the land, that would have been Thurgood Marshall, who was an undergrad at Lincoln and then went to Howard Law. So the HBCU connection and how it produces greatness and great leaders is unparalleled. And then when you talk about the Divine Nine, I mean, you and I are both members. I'm Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, Kappa Alpha Psi, the Nukes.
That's right.
Those organizations were
formed. New pie, baby.
I knew you had to throw that in there. But those organizations were formed for the very reason of creating a platform and a focus and a discipline to cultivate black leadership that would be transformative. Unlike a lot of the young people think today that these organizations are only about strolling and stepping and partying and shenanigans. No, in reality, their very founding at the core was about the ideals of developing black leadership, transformative in the community. So, when you look at these institutions, and then you got the church, obviously, as sort of these three pillars in the community that have been critical to the upliftment of our people. And so, yes, when you get somebody who is checking off those boxes, and, you look at Kamala's background, Caribbean background, as well as South Asian, but very much, American in her upbringing, even though she also spent time in Canada. Again, she is someone who has the foundation of the country, who has the background where she understands, the from where we have come. When she hears, lift every voice and sing. No, that's real to her as she's singing that. That's not just a song that she's learned. She knows what those lyrics mean. So we know that as a community. So it's really good. It's powerful to see somebody in that role.
It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric LaVille, and you're joining us for this special episode, Harris for president. Just a little bit over almost 2 weeks ago, President Joe Biden stepped out of the race and nominated his vice president, Kamala Harris, for the nomination of president of the United States for the Democratic Party. In his going away speech, he stated that it's time for new voices, and he's passing the torch to new leadership for the party. Well, when we talk about new leadership, new voice, and the excitement around it, I want to first delve into the excitement around this nominee, who right now is the presumptive nominee, who has secured enough pledged delegates to have the nomination in Chicago, and in about 7 days will announce her vice presidential candidate.
Right.
Now, with that, let's talk about the excitement with black voters. Right after the speech that night, there was a Zoom that went out to black women, and it was black women for Harris, and then Monday it was one through Roland Martin, black men for Harris. And
right, I was on that call. Yep.
Yeah, and it was so many. I actually watched it on YouTube, and
right.
It was to me, and I'll get your take on it. But to me, it was probably one of the most it was probably one of the most effective calls that I have been a part of in webinars, if you want to say that, because everybody had a story, and I think everybody could relate to that story. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I thought once they got past some of the silliness of the shout outs of the fraternity, when you listen to actually the content that was said by the different individuals that spoke, and the energy that was in the chat when I was able to see and participate in brothers chatting and making statements back and forth, it was very much reminiscent of the kind of energy that I saw happening when I covered the first Obama campaign, where there's this renewed feeling of America, possibly fulfilling its promise that we were all taught to believe. And, you had people coming together, putting aside, their fraternal differences or their regional differences, or the fact that a lot of brothers were on a call who had not gone to college, and that didn't matter. And a lot of that was said, and it was even encouraged that, look, this is not about, just us from a class standpoint and looking at the things that separate us, but this is about coming together as black men for the best interests of our community. Again, going back to even the roots of why the organizations, Divine Nine, were founded. It was founded to galvanize black men and women to do something positive to uplift the entire community. So the money that was raised, the energy that was on there, I agree with you. I mean, it was high level, and it was impressive and beautiful to be a part of it.
Right. And the same excitement, I've heard from others about the black women for Harris as well. And the amount of money that was raised on those calls, man.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it was so many people signing on to the call that it was overriding those platforms. So you had to go on YouTube, you had to go on this social media network to view it.
Exactly.
It was that many. So I think the excitement itself is definitely there. Also by increasing voter registration. So because when we get down to strategy, it really going to depend upon African Americans, the youth coming out to vote. Well, I want to segue now from the excitement of Harris as president from the African American perspective to now the reality of Harris for president from the presidential candidate perspective. So now that she is presumptive nominee, she's out there, and the saying, all's fair in war and politics.
Absolutely.
How does the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, how do they now shift their argument? Because at first it was Joe, but now Joe's gone, and now it's Harris. How do they shift their technique in combating what I believe is a statistical dead heat in even race right now?
Well, they didn't waste any time on coming out with the nastiness. And the most recent rally that Trump did, he even said, if you don't mind, I'm not going to be nice anymore. And that's that kind of brutal language, and like you said, all's fair in politics and treating it like war. She can absolutely expect that, but she's also she had to run for statewide for office when she was a attorney general. She had to do that as a senator. So, and to a lesser degree, being on a ticket with Joe Biden, but she's got to know that that's coming, and it's already out there in play. They do it at their own peril in some ways, because there's one thing of riling up your base that wants to hear that kind of rhetoric, and there's another thing of getting the estimated 7% of undecided voters that are out there in some of these key battle states that you need to win in order to actually get the presidency. And so that's why some of the other Republicans have come out and warning against these comments about people saying she was a DEI hire and going after her race and her gender, that they do it at their peril. Because in that 7%, roughly, more as the statistical expert, you got people who are independents, who are undecided, who are not feeling either one of the candidates, and definitely don't feel that great about Trump. And in a lot of ways, that's who they're fighting for. They're fighting for who are the crossover and the undecideds. And if you use too much rhetoric that turns those people off, then you're running a losing campaign. So they've got to be conscious of how nasty they're going to get and who they're actually going to turn off. There's one thing to your base is excited about it; it likes to hear all that red meat. But if that doesn't translate to those undecided voters pulling the lever for you, then we're looking at Trump being a loser yet again.
So now that's their, they're going to develop their strategy. But what is the Harris message? We know that they're going to be on playing defense a lot, but what is their offense? Do they finish Joe, the promises of Joe, or does it change?
Well, I think she's put out her first campaign ad, and she's talking about the theme of freedom. So she's focusing on the issues, freedom, reproductive freedom, right? She's talking about freedom to be the kind of person in this society that you want to be. She's going to focus on the issues where the Republicans and Trump in particularly, as well as his running mate, have been, very extreme on. Again, I think looking at those undecided voters that can go either way, at the same time continuing to energize her own base. And I think that she's also going to learn from some of the mistakes that Hillary Clinton made by not going and campaigning strong in some of those battleground states. She already said that she's going to be in Wisconsin. She's going to be in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. So I'm hopeful. Hey, I always love kudos from somebody who actually does a little history and research and learns from past missteps as opposed to repeating them over and over again. So kudos to her for that, if that's what she goes on and executes.
So, Will, let's talk about the missteps of the Clinton campaign. Now, remember, Clinton was up 20 points on Trump in 2016, and then all of a sudden it became very even. Then all of a sudden it became very dark, and of course we know that she lost. And the margins were not that large, in those states that she lost in. What are some of the things that you think Harris has to do and her campaign has to do not to repeat those steps?
Well, I think, it's interesting. I was just on a call for Black Futures Lab, which is an organization that was co-founded by Alicia Garza. She was one of the founders of Black Lives Matters movement. And they've got this Black Census Project where they're actually going out and been polling Black voters in ways that other polls haven't really captured the true thinking and perspectives of black voters. And one of the things that I found interesting that they discovered was that, the economy is one of the top things that black people are very much at the top of the list in terms of what they want to be addressed. And guess what? That goes across the board to a lot of different constituencies. So why do I say that? I say that she's got to look at those issues that go across the board of different constituencies, and that includes looking at middle class to poor whites in the country, and as opposed to calling them or referring to them as deplorables, right? Like Hillary Clinton had done, or not going into the areas where they are and trying to speak to their issues of increased wages and so forth that they are concerned about, right? So I think that Kamala is doing that. And that was just one of the strengths that Joe Biden was supposed to have had, that he could talk to the white middle class. He talked about being from Scranton. Those are the types of things that I think would be wise for her to do, is to talk about these issues that cut across a number of different constituencies, and talk about them in a way that extends what Joe Biden's administration was able to do and defends it and talks honestly about what actually did happen. That was another thing that they found in the census, is that when you actually explain to people and show them the data of what the state of the economy is, or the state of whatever it is, schools, gun violence, when you explain these things in data and help them to understand it, rather than just relying on what's talking points or relying what people see on social media shared by their cousin who got it from his friend and their friend, people turn around and they understand the issues and they want to vote on the issues. So I think it would be wise for her to do that, to not get wrapped up in personality, because when it comes to black voters, and particularly the South, it's not so much about personality as it about, are you going to deliver on the issues?
Yeah.
And that was another thing that they saw in the census that they pointed out, is that there's a lot of distrust in politicians because of a feeling that politicians talk a good game but don't deliver on the issues that they talk about. So we'll have to see how Kamala addresses that. And I think what's very important is that she also needs the House of Representatives. She needs people to vote to flip the House. Because if you've been paying attention to what's going on in this country in the last few sessions, even going back to Obama, is that if you don't have the House, if you don't have both branches of the government, both houses, the Senate, it's very difficult to get anything done.
Absolutely. Well, one thing about it, Will, is that this is the summer of 2024 is shaping up to be one of the most historic summers, and with this election coming up, that we've ever seen in our history. And we're going to continue to make history in this country, and hopefully it's the good history that we can make.
Shirley Chisholm is smiling. I know Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman, to run for, president. And seek the presidency for a major party. It was in Democratic Party back in the, what was that, back in the 70s?
Yeah, in the 70s.
Yeah,
so shout out to the late Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm out of the great city of New York. So again, we're going to continue to monitor this, but as always, brother Leviz, man, I appreciate you for coming on this special show that we're doing, and we're going to continue it. And again, go out, whatever you do, make sure you vote, register to vote, and make sure you take a friend with you. Until next time, be good, be great, God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Carrie Washington, and you're listening to State of the Water with award-winning host Dr. Eric Claville.